Hello, hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Miley. I'm part of the Community Power and Policy Partnerships team here at the Othering and Belonging Institute. We facilitate participatory research projects with community organizations to reimagine our infrastructure. And I'm here with a few of my teammates, Milana and Nicole and Eli. And of course, also joined by our amazing panelists, Roberto from Fideicomiso Comunitario Tierra Libre in LA, Felix from MidPen Housing here in the Bay, and Gerrlyn from the Common Counsel Foundation working with folks across the state. And even though we're not able to do a full round of introductions all together, we invite you to introduce yourself in the chat, share your name, where in the country or world you're joining us from. We're talking about housing today, but we know folks are maybe coming from different corners, so curious about where you're coming from in the housing ecosystem or the broader movement ecosystem. And we're excited to have you all here for this conversation. Originally had started off as a follow-up to our research project on scaling community-owned housing in California, which is really rooted in this idea that to transform our housing future, we need to start practicing the skills of that future here and now. So the goal of the conversation today is to think collectively about the ways housers are building relationships across divides and highlight the ways that sometimes conflicting approaches can actually invite these types of uncommon partnerships and collaborations. So a couple logistical things first. Milana Yolanko is the co-host that you want to contact. If you're having any technical issues, you can message her. If you're interested in turning on the captions for this discussion, that button should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It could be hiding under the More button, circle with 3 dots inside. So to start us off, I'll very briefly talk about some of the frameworks that we offered up in this report, Living into the Future. Felix, Gerrlyn, and Roberto will share their work, and Nicole will facilitate some discussion, and then Eli will facilitate some audience Q&A. And just to let everyone know, we are recording this conversation, and we will share that along with the slides with everyone when we're done. So to jump right into it, like I mentioned, in some ways, this conversation we're hosting today began a long time ago. We landed here as a part of the research project that asked what would it take to scale community ownership in California. And to answer this question, we brought together developers, organizers, advocates, and funders working on community-owned housing across the state. And in addition to interviews throughout the process, we gathered practitioners for 3 days away from their day-to-day work to do some long-term visioning and strategic planning together. And we had originally envisioned a policy roadmap. We found the diversity of community-owned housing practices really went beyond policy and wanted to extend our framework to include lots of different paths to scaling community ownership. And so the frameworks that we're going to share here are really rooted in this diversity amidst the community ownership field and the ways they're embracing different governance structures and financing mechanisms. But the frameworks really lose a lot of that nuance and diversity. So you can find all that detail in the report itself, which Milana is going to share in the chat for you. So first, in trying to make sense of this diversity of practices, we started with clarifying what do we mean by community-owned housing. And across all those different structures that are tailored to meet the unique local needs, community-owned housing practitioners were unified in these 2 principles of decommodified development and shared governance. So these echo a lot of the frameworks from other movements, from solidarity economics and other movements to fundamentally transform our economic system. And community-owned housing practitioners really place their work under this larger project of a social and political transformation. where practicing community ownership now actually holds this aspirational for a future of community stewardship. Community stewardship imagines a new relationship to our housing, a kind of housing security built on relational reciprocity and mutual responsibility, in which we become stewards and caretakers instead of owners of our land and housing. Where community ownership refers to the pragmatic tactics and incremental reforms necessary under these current conditions, community stewardship speaks to this transformational work of changing systems and culture. In embracing this sort of two scales of ownership and stewardship, we also heard practitioners speak to these three different types of scale that would get us towards this transformed future. So scaling out describes the work of building new units. So this is usually our default definition of scale within housing circles. But scaling also includes scaling up, or the work of creating more enabling environment by changing policies and institutions. And then finally, and maybe most critically to community-owned housing practitioners, scaling also includes scaling deep. So getting to that shift in values, change in culture that practitioners described in community stewardship. With this shared understanding of community ownership and scale, we then started to organize this wide range of interventions that practitioners were using to scale community ownership with integrity. To help us in the field make sense of all those and how they fit together, we co-developed this framework that categorizes an interlocking ecosystem of both public and movement infrastructure. Practitioners particularly emphasize the need to ground this infrastructure in both principles of community ownership, that these pieces were all connected, but pointing particular attention to shared governance because that can get left out of conversations about scaling housing solutions. So many examples of what this looks like in practice. Again, the report really gets into those details and highlights, uplifts some of those efforts that are ongoing, underway. The focus for today is really more on the crank at the center that turns all these infrastructure gears, what we've called relational organizing. Relational organizing is simple. As the name suggests, it speaks to a type of community organizing that is focused on relationships as a strategy for building collective power towards a shared vision. So the work of building individual relationships, then make up relationships across organizations, and then feeds into this system as a whole. At the othering, and building this relational muscle at the individual level asks us to start with deeply listening, seeing, and understanding each other across our differences. And at the Othering and Belonging Institute, we often call this process of opening ourselves up to other perspectives as bridging. But at its heart, it's about embracing curiosity for others, and in particular, curiosity for the whole person, not just within our professional roles. And so in that individual relationship building, we can then begin to organize and build these skills towards transforming our future. And for those of you in the movement work, you already know that this kind of relational organizing can be difficult within our current systems. Everyone's juggling competing priorities and often competing for resources. But another challenge that we're seeing underneath those structural barriers is that we don't fully understand each other's approaches. The more we've followed up on these questions of how to build relationships and hearing from folks in different corners of the housing ecosystem, we started seeing patterns that speak to sort of these different priorities and approaches and how those differences feed fragmentation. And bridging really gives us a framework for this first step in relational organizing, where we as a housing field can get honest and direct about our differences, which then opens up this space for us to live into a future housing ecosystem that creates space for experimenting with new ways of working together. So The panelists will speak much more concretely about what connecting across those differences looks like, but we wanted to quickly speak to the themes we've seen so far, namely around scale and time. So at a high level, what we've heard from folks, both inside and outside the LIHTC world, is that often LIHTC is pushing developers to think of scale primarily in this sense of scaling out, so oriented towards building more units. And that's largely a function of how the funding programs are structured, but also is a response to this constant awareness of the worsening housing crisis and this real sense of urgency to help as many people as possible as soon as possible. Um, and in competing for LIHTC and doing this work to assemble complex capital stacks, developers often have an urgency around time in the development process that feels incompatible with deep community engagement. For developers more in the community ownership world, their work often prioritizes scaling deep and orients towards this cultural transformation. And along with their commitment to permanent affordability through decommodification, this commitment to shared governance also requires a longer timeline. And so that means community-owned housing projects are often incompatible with dominant funding programs. So practitioners are sort of doing this trade-off with the broader reach and the deep work, focusing on deep impact with a smaller number of residents. And to us, this seems like a core disconnect to address, where the speed of financing is at odds with the speed of trust. And what we keep hearing from folks on the community ownership side, in balancing these trade-offs between scaling deep and scaling out, is this anxiety that if we only focus on scaling out, we risk losing the work of scaling deep and this potential for a bigger cultural transformation. That anxiety and the reality that community ownership really is a small part of the affordable housing field as a whole, is, fueling sort of this need to guard against that flattening of scale. And for those on the outside of the community ownership field, that defensiveness can feel more like building a fence than building a bridge. From our perspective, the commitment to protecting those core principles and commitment to scaling deep is carving out this essential space for something new, especially because community ownership is often met with skepticism from the broader housing sector, including funders, about whether that model is scalable or if their vision is realistic. And so within this same tension between a dominant system with LIHTC financing and this alternative through community ownership, we're also hearing that these same differences that are dividing us are really generating some obvious synergies for collaboration, which build on some complementary skills. And again, we'll hear more from our panelists about what this means, and what they look like in these different contexts. But we just wanted to highlight these two strengths that we see coming together: a strength in organizing development and a strength in organizing people, which seems to, build towards these different contexts where collaborations might be a development partnership for a specific project, might be a part of a legislative campaign, or could be in this sort of bigger coalition and networking space. And so leveraging that diversity of expertise, is sort of the goal of connecting across these differences, that we need all of these skills that are already operating in all these different silos in the field. And we need, everybody to make this scaling up, out, and deep a reality. And that is what we have planned to set us up. I know that was all very fast. Again, you can find more details in our report. I'm excited to turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves and their work. start talking about what this all really means in practice. So, Roberto, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, this is my 8 minutes, right? All right. Hey everyone. My name is Roberto Garcia-Ceballos. I'm the transitioning out co-director of Fideicomiso Comunitario Tierra Libre. Um, and I'll still be in the org, just have a different role. But I'm here to talk to you about our partnership with Little Tokyo Service Center and what it means for Fideicomiso. But just before I get started, I come to this work through years of organizing in labor and community. I entered the housing world, being a housing organizer during the financial crisis in 2008, fighting banks foreclosing on families in Western Mass and the Northeast. I'm not from the Northeast. I'm from San Jose, or I grew up in San Jose. I'm from Mexico, and after doing that intensive organizing in the Northeast, I moved to Boyle Heights in East LA to support an affordable housing developer who had an organizing arm around development without displacement campaigns and winning 100% affordable housing on metro-owned land. And out of that work, in that deep organizing that we did and relationship building in the community, we realized that there's inconsistencies, contradictions to the affordable housing world, and that and I'll get into some of those contradictions, but our conclusion in that organization was to form a community land trust to kind of fill some of the gaps of our affordable housing developer in terms of community governance, in terms of permanent affordability, in terms of building power in the neighborhood as well. And so in 2018, we decided to form a community land trust, who I'm now the co-director. And the community land trust is rooted in the belief that land and housing should serve people, not profit, and that communities should have the power to decide their own future. Um, but in 2020, we all kind of entered the global pandemic, right? And Fideicomiso joined this coalition that doesn't exist anymore, which is called the Healthy LA Coalition, which formed to address the crisis, the global pandemic, and draw lessons from the 2008 housing crash. And within that coalition, there was a housing and community control committee where community land trusts, affordable housing developers, and tenant advocates came together to develop policy proposals that could counter speculative land grabs, which we saw into like post 2008. And in that committee, we were in relationship with Little Tokyo Service Center. And that committee came up with a proposal for using federal recovery dollars to acquire housing, um, preserve affordability, and protect tenants. Um, and we weren't able to secure any federal funds, but we were able to win an LA County pilot program for community land trust with like $14 million to be able to acquire buildings. And so Little Tokyo Service Center and Fideicomiso Comunitario Tierra Libre were just like natural fit, like allies. We were both like we're both based in neighboring communities. Like, so if you know it, Los Angeles, if you go down First Street on the east side and you cross the First Street Bridge or the Fourth Street Bridge or the Sixth Street Bridge, you're in Little Tokyo. And we're like really close to each other. And so for us, like that's really important, like geography, right? The other is that we have shared histories in terms of like the civil rights struggles to anti-gentrification fights. Like it's known throughout the country that Japanese communities are disappearing. At one point, there was like 40 Japanese, like Japanese community areas, and I think there's like four now across the country. So we share a lot of like struggles And most importantly, we have like shared values. Like Little Tokyo Service Center is like one of the OG like developers in LA, and their mission is to promote community control and self-determination. And that is like really aligned with Fideicomiso Comunitario Tierra Libre. And then over the years, we've just developed, like, deepened our relationship by working together, not only on acquiring like land, but really kind of promoting broader campaigns for community control and transformation in our city. And examples of that is like the campaign for United to House LA or Measure ULA in Los Angeles. Um, do I have time? Like, can someone give me like
You've
just
got
kind
a
of
minute.
curious? Okay, and so what we've accomplished together, I'll just do this quickly. Through the county COT program, we acquired 11 units in East Los Angeles, and it was our first major property. And Little Tokyo Service Center brought development experience, financial capacity, and real like project management experience. Like and Fideicomiso brought deep organizing relationships, a governance model rooted in community control, and like real direct engagement with the tenants that lived in the building. Together, we stabilized like residents, secured funds for rehabilitation, and created a long-term plan for community ownership in the neighborhood. And in our shared work, apart from like all the other partnerships that were created during this pilot program, were really influential in how policy is being built out now for acquisition rehab programs at the state level and on a local level as we're implementing new funding sources. And so for us, like I think these sort of partnerships could really create policy at a larger scale. And I'll just leave it at that, and I'll pass it over to the next like speaker.
Thank you so much, Roberto. I know 8 minutes is not enough to talk about any of y'all's work, and we will have more time to discuss as a panel and then also as a Q&A session after the panel. So please drop your questions in the chat, in the Q&A box if you have it, and I will pass it over to Felix.
Thanks, Nicole, and thanks, Roberto. I'm Felix AuYeung. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at MidPen Housing. I've been at MidPen for the last 10 years and in the sector doing affordable housing work for the last 20 years. I came out from a mechanical engineering and a community development background and went into community development in the Bay Area, which I found out quickly, that housing is very specialized. There are a few CDCs that are neighborhood based, but that, because housing is so complex that there's a whole industry around that. And that's where I landed, and that's where I've been since. So I want to just introduce MidPen Housing here in that this organization was founded in 1970 and was started by a group of volunteers and concerned citizens in the Silicon Valley. Eventually, it got its first staff and its first property. And I don't think anyone at that time could have imagined that 55 years later, MidPen would be a very large nonprofit organization that has 600 staff members and a development, property management, and resident services arm within the company that owns 139 communities and 10,000 homes in the Bay Area, in 12 Bay Area counties. And the sum net value of those properties is like over $3 billion at this point. So, and I'm saying this because everyone starts small, right? And, but that future is, it's unknown in a way. And it's something that I think we want to think about what that looks like in the future. What if community-owned housing becomes a norm, and what would that look like when it's fully kind of materialized? MidPen created a strategic plan in 2020 for the period 2021 to 2025. Some of the big goals that were, kind of just clear kind of guidance for us was to produce 3,000 new affordable homes, and with 40% of those new homes targeted for extremely low income and permanent supportive housing households. But also in the strategic plan, we had a piece around people and promoting community center practices that intentionally address the legacies of disinvestment and inequality. And from that, our department has really kind of made our own kind of objective to partner with smaller locally based organizations where we can, both to effectuate new homes in different ways, and also to build capacity within the sector to kind of do more things. Within that, MidPen has actually had 3 partnerships with CLTs. Some are lighter than others. So one of them is with EPA Can Do, and EPA Can Do's CLT affiliate called Pahali. MidPen came to three homes in East Palo Alto that were sold to us below market rate, with the kind of intention by the seller that they eventually be converted to affordable home ownership. We weren't in a good position to do that, but we had a trusted partner in EPA Can Do, where we've partnered twice previously on LIHTC deals, actually, and LIHTC projects. The current status is we were able to successfully sell the 3 homes to EPA Can Do at cost, and EPA Can Do has already turned around and sold the first one to the existing tenant, who is now a homeowner. So that's a great story, and I'd love for them to, at some conference or another, be able to tell that story and what that took, and what it meant for that tenant to transition into homeownership, and how this can be replicated. Anything that happens in East Palo Alto, we go straight to EPA Can Do and just ask what does the community want here before we even step in, before MidPen step in to do anything. The second partnership is with Self-Based CLT, and they came to us because they knew that the city of San Jose was going to have some preservation money, but that the city of San Jose had contingent or made it contingent to access that money, that the CLT would have to have a development partner that has more experience. So they came to us early, and we signed an agreement where we would provide technical assistance, but the CLT would effectively run and own everything. The status today is they have successfully completed the acquisition of 18 homes on Virginia Street in San Jose. They're in the process of signing or executing their city loan documents so that they can start a gut rehab of those 3 buildings. It was a lot of work, and I think just having like really regular and honest communications was a necessity to kind of keep the project moving. And then I think they have goals to eventually convert those into kind of cooperative ownership structure under the CLT. The last one is with Just Homes in Oakland. They're a new CLT, and they have an opportunity to acquire a 4-plex in Oakland that will serve homeless families. And that one is strictly a technical assistance kind of situation where we're providing some guidance on the purchase. And they currently have commitments from both BAFA and San Francisco Housing Accelerator to move forward with that acquisition. And the scheduled closing is in September. And so those are the 3 partnerships that we have, and then I guess we'll get into the discussion after Gerrlyn's introduction.
Thank you so much, Felix. And next we will hear from Gerrlyn.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Hi, everybody. Welcome and thank you for tuning in. I'm Gerrlyn Gacao, she, her. I'm a program strategist for the Community Ownership for Community Power Fund at Common Counsel Foundation. And I'm definitely going to be able to speak a little bit more about the program that I help manage. But before I get into that, just wanted to share a little bit about myself as well as the organization that I work with. So personally, I have years of experience, and my background is really rooted in public service, but also organizing in across civil rights issues, tenant organizing, as well as organizing within the ANHPI community. In addition to that, I kind of came through to this work through my sort of lived experience growing up in Stockton, California, where my family was really impacted and lost their house during the housing market crash back in 2008. So that's what really inspired me and politicized me to be able to do a lot of this work. And so after doing all of that, I ended up coming to philanthropy about 5 years ago, mainly as a way to be able to support organizing work and movement building work, even if I'm not sort of I can't be, or I'm not at sort of at the front lines myself. And so if you're not familiar with Common Counsel Foundation, I've been here for 2 years now, officially. It's a 35-year-old social justice public foundation based in Oakland, but we have a national scope. And then our housing justice initiatives, one of which I'm going to speak about today, have a more focused California statewide scope as well. And through its years, the organization has just been very dedicated to supporting movements and power building, right, in different ways. And one of those strategies in particular is through playing an intermediary role in managing philanthropic pooled funds. And if you're not super familiar with what that is, they're essentially, programs or initiatives that are resourced by multiple funders. And we really use this as a tactic to be able to practice and create new ways for philanthropy to really respond to the field and engage in different ways and really closely with community partners or folks on the ground. Um, and so at the moment, CCF manages two housing justice related pooled funds. Community Ownership for Community Power Fund, or COCP, is one of those. And that really aims to, support and expand essentially the community ownership movement across California and the state. So it was, and just to even share a little bit more about the origin story. It was launched in 2022, but the idea for COCP, which is something we always like to really note, is that the idea for it was really born in 2019, and it was born out of not our ideas, but out of organizing efforts from 5 movement-driven, organizer-led CLTs across the state. One of which I'm really excited to really join me today, Roberto from Fideicomiso Comunitario Tierra, Libre. It was them in addition to like SAC CLT, Thrive Santa Ana, Oak CLT, and Trust South LA. They were initially brought together as grantees of a statewide funder, and it was through a lot of that relationship building and really thinking about or talking through some of their shared challenges and being able to expand this work that kind of led them to really organize funders to create a way for philanthropy to step up and in to support this work not only on the investment on the grant side, but also on the investment side, which has been like a long time early particular challenge. And it was through that work that then COCP was really created to strengthen the ecosystem. And then CCF was selected to be the facilitator in managing the program itself. So we're always wanting to highlight that origin story where possible. And if you go to the next slide, we really take a more holistic approach with COCP in trying to support the housing justice ecosystem or movement in 3 different ways. Aside from the general operating, we do multi-year Gen Ops grants to support capacity building to community ownership organizations. But we also try to go beyond that as well, where we have an ecosystem building arm. We do funder organizing. We have sort of a learning and evaluation component to track how the field is really evolving in the state. We also support some TA efforts across the state as well. And then, last but not least, which is what I'm mainly going to be talking to y'all about today, is we have been, since we started in 2022, have been working with 14 different organizations, including those original five community ownership organizations across the state to co-design and eventually launch with an ETA of next year an integrated capital fund that's really meant to support community ownership acquisitions in the state. It's also meant to be, it will be community governed. And so when it's launched, it'll be the first of its kind in California. And so we're just really excited to have gotten that moving. Going to the next slide. Here's just like a few milestones of like the co-design process specifically that we've been able to accomplish with our work thus far with our partners. We approved kind of when we first initially started, we created and approved like a North Star document that really codifies a lot of the vision, values, shared goals, things like that, that we really refer back to over and over in our process. We set a target goal for pilot funding, with a goal of 20 to $25 million of raising funds for the pilot round with 0 to 2% money coming in. And that has really, informed our direction for our fundraising and capital raise. Also excited to share that we're in the process of finally finalizing our initial set of financial products. And then this year, we also approved both the governance model and the legal structure for the fund. And we're in the process right now, actually, of finalizing founding members for the governing bodies itself as well. So lots of exciting movement happening, and we're really just proud to kind of see a lot of it coming to life. If you move to the next slide, just really quickly, I just wanted to share a little bit about it's just a visual of who our partners with, who our partners are specifically that we're working with to co-design this integrated capital fund, all really rooted in movements, like have diversity across experience, community ownership models and regions as well, and have like a very deep commitment to permanent affordability in housing. So just wanted to share a little bit about kind of the diversity of folks that were selected and why we decided to partner with these folks who have been so critical to the process. And I think for my piece, I'll just kind of end with, one of the things that we were asked to share was maybe a little bit about, what has made the partnership strong and how we were able to really address certain tensions or challenges that have arisen in the process. And, I'll just share that prioritizing relationship building up front and then building that North Star document and really building that trust has been so key to really providing a foundation for all of the critical moments where we had tensions, challenges, ran into a lot of contradictions in this work where we really had to work together to figure out how we wanted to move forward. And in addition to that, I want to kind of reiterate in the way that we really approach our work at Common Counsel, we really look towards our partners to really guide this work. And so our partners on the ground, these 14 organizations, have been at the helm of so many of the key decision-making processes and points. And I think that has really been key to our collective success so far. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you so much, Gerrlyn, and also Roberto and Felix. It is amazing to hear from all of you about this incredible work that you are all doing. And we have such deep appreciation for the concrete ways that you're building out these partnerships. I want to zoom out a bit and talk a bit about how at a higher level, what are the implications for the housing ecosystem as a whole that we can learn from this work that you all have been deep in on building partnerships and bridging between different silos within the housing field. I should stop and introduce myself. My name is Nicole Montojo. I'm a staff researcher at the Othering and Belonging Institute. I've been here for about 7 years and was a co-author on the report that Miley had shared about today, along with Eli, who you'll hear from later. And so I want to zoom out to what's possible in terms of bridging and partnerships, what are the challenges and how we move through those together. And I think there's so many lessons we can learn from your work. And so I want to start with a question, getting at what you were saying, Gerrlyn, about a North Star. Um, I agree that that's a really important place to start. So we wanted to start with this question of what's the big vision that you all are holding for your work as we talk particularly about housing stability and housing justice at scale. What does that look like? And it's a key question, I think, because we often ask if we all have the same North Star. So it's important to start here and understand where our answers to this question might converge or diverge. Um, and so I will ask Gerrlyn to please tell us about your North Star.
Yeah, sure. I could kick us off. Well, so I mean, I would start by saying that for CCF, the approach generally that we take to our work really revolves around, shifting norms and traditional power structures in philanthropy, right? And so, with that, when it comes to our work around housing justice, we really believe that a lot of it is really rooted in community power, right? And we try to express that as much as possible. And I feel like we have done a lot of that within our co-design work towards building this integrated capital fund, where, like I mentioned, we really centered our community partners' experiences and expertise to really figure out together how do we move forward and how do we make this work, right? I think, and I'll say too, like when it comes to COCP, we really think about it as more than a fund. It's really we're hoping it to be a tool for the movement to be able to reclaim land, to build community wealth, to foster self-determination for impacted communities across the state. And I feel like that's our North Star, right? Like really being able to allow communities that have been impacted by like in our inequitable housing systems for so long be able to build the world and land and housing systems that we've been wanting to see. And I think when it comes to scale, I really appreciated the diagram of like out, up, and deep, I believe. And it's like it's not just about the number of units that are built, although of course that's like traditionally how we think of that in housing development, but we really kind of try to focus a bit more on and center on like the scaling deep through relationship and network building, trying our best to support communities in different ways um, that realize community ownership in a way that feels authentic and true to their own communities, right? Because there is no one way to do this work. And really just listening to them to be able to our partners on the ground to figure out how we can respond effectively.
Thanks, Geraldine. And I want to go around in here from all three of you. So I want to pass it to Roberto next.
Yeah, I mean, I think my vision, or my like North Star is like getting to a place where a large sector of our housing is decommodified and community controlled. And and what I mean by that is like there are large uh part of housing here in LA. We'll start with LA. Like we'll start at that scale. That like housing is actually a human right and not a commodity. And where those like most impacted by displacement are the ones guiding the solutions. And I imagine an ecosystem where CLTs, CDCs, and other community-based organizations and labor organizations work together without being pitted against each other for funding or for like benefits that should be like a given in terms of like the human right. And for us, like an example is yeah, like our 11 unit development showed us when like tenants and CLTs and affordable housing developers work as a team, we could like one protect affordability and strengthen community power at the same time. So that's like little scale, and then like large scale for us in how like we're building that is like passing the United House like ballot measure, where we generate like 600 million to 900 million dollars a year by taxing land transfers over 4%, like that are over $5 million or $4 million, and generating large scale of funding so that like we have more. funds to do rent relief, to do homeless prevention, and to build permanent affordable housing at a scale where we're not just fighting over light tech like funding. And so that really requires like large coalition building in ways that we haven't seen in our regions. In LA, it was like bringing over 300 different types of organizations in the city, including Little Tokyo Service Center, including all the community land trusts and affordable housing developers that historically were not involved in this sort of ballot initiative, and labor, like having labor fund some of this work. And so for me, I think like these non-traditional partnerships like need to become the norm for us to really kind of build the scale and the type of like really implement like the way we like acquired a building, like it should be like how we build large scale campaigns like this as well.
Thanks, Roberto. I'm hearing a lot of resonance with what you and Gerrlyn shared so far, and I want to bring Felix into the conversation.
Thanks. I'm gonna step back way, way, way back. My North Star is really far away in a different galaxy, right? But I think if you think about like if I think about people who are visionaries who can see kind of what this world should be. This is the idealist in me speaking here, but John Powell will talk about a world where everyone belongs and there is belonging without othering. Charles Eisenstein would say, what is this more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible? Um, and I think we know pieces of that. It's going to have to involve, an economy that doesn't hoard wealth at the top. Um, it has to be a government that's responsive to its people. It has to have an electorate where 1/3 don't elect to not go vote, and then a whole bunch just basically can be easily manipulated by advertising and rhetoric and kind of false promises. We need a whole system like wholesale changes where we have a lot more agency, and therefore the system is a lot more responsive to us, right? And all of that is outside the world of housing, but it's also necessary for housing to work, right? So this is the whole intersectionality, interconnection. This like our movement cannot supersede these other things, and it's dependent on these other things. So for me, it's like every solution that we can think of um, needs to build toward that large vision, right? It can't sacrifice another cause to make housing possible. It has to all be one coherent and kind of um, final or like the place where we want to be. We have to get there together. And housing is a piece of it. And so we don't want housing solutions that maintain the status quo. We don't want housing solutions that maybe actually take us backwards in terms of separating people as owners versus non-owners. And we want to kind of keep heading to a world where I think we want everyone to have agency, to have housing as a human right, to not have homelessness, right? That is caused by the larger economic system. And then how do we get there? And I just the last part of this is like I think a lot of it is also within us. And people would say like this is the how to be question or who am I question. Um, and that we don't accidentally replicate the systems we're trying to replace, that we can see this North Star more clearly so that the actions that we take as individuals and as a movement actually take us there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Felix. I'm sensing so much convergence between the visions that you three are saying, and I think that speaks to how much of a possibility there is for partnership when often it seems like from day to day we may be in conflict that actually there is a North Star that, may have different nuances across organizations, but that at a high level, at the values level, that we are oriented in a similar direction. And at the same time, it's super difficult to hold on to that North Star in the day-to-day work that y'all are doing, which pushes us to think on a much shorter time horizon, and the systems that we're all working in don't really support us in thinking about how we get to that long-term transformation. And I think it's critical that we really get clear on what those challenges are, like where the systems are not working for us, and want to think about how we move forward to change those systems. And would love to get your perspective on this. So what are some of those systems or dynamics that get in the way of partnership and collaboration as you're seeing it? And most importantly, how can we move toward changing these systems? So I'm going to snake back around. I'll start with Felix this time.
Okay. Well, I think because of the economic system that we're in, um, which failure causes a lot of the unaffordability and the homelessness and and the problems that we have. Um, Funding is a big issue, right? Funding, um, the math doesn't work. When we try to lower rents, we can't actually build the buildings that we need, and we can't operate the buildings that we have. And so we're dependent on subsidies, and we're depending on public sources for that. And you can see that currently how the federal government is weaponizing that, right? They can just basically, if they don't like you, they can cut off your funding, and that's that, right? So I think if we can find a way to be more, well, both more self-sufficient and at the same time have an economy that works better, then that will help housing become a little bit more achievable. Um, but in the meantime, I think from you mentioned earlier about skepticism of of this model, and the first place I owned was a condominium in a HOA complex that had 220 families in it. And it had a lot of challenges with maintenance and with insurance and got your typical issues of joint ownership. But there was no perception that it can't be done, right? There was no perception that the people who lived there couldn't make the rules that were necessary to make that function. And what we're asking here, I think, is not that different. And we're asking people to have self-determination, to have agency. And yet there is this kind of some skepticism around whether this is doable or not. And then my last thoughts on this, maybe like you said, I think the lie tech world, it's more focused around scaling with numbers, right? So we build empty housing units and we fill with people using a lottery system. So in a way, it's a very randomized kind of system that is inherently unfair to me. But the people who end up living in the communities do create community, and then it is its own kind of place. Versus this other model of like thinking first about, how are neighborhoods formed, who's there, who are contributing to that community, and how do we help people stay there if they want to, and new people to join if they want to. And it's not that we need both per se. It's like a little bit more nuanced than that. And I think, from our side, for the nonprofit side, nonprofit housing, tech housing side, I think that there is a question of like, how can we make our system provide more agency for the residents, and kind of start shifting that idea. Like there's some kind of compatibility here of this concept of um, agency that can be incorporated in that, while we're also concurrently building out this alternative institution strategy of using CLTs to prove that there are other ways to do ownership and housing.
Thanks, Felix. I'll pass it to Roberto.
Hey, yeah, I mean, I think this is a really interesting question. I think there's different approaches. Like, I think for me, like the immediate thing is like, don't be scared of experimentation in like your region. But then like another part of me says like, we can't continue to do work without acknowledging like what are the core issues, you know? And like we have to acknowledge whether you're a developer, you're a CLT, whether you're a tenant organizing group, like that these are rooted issues around disinvestment, like racism, and that like if we just try to think about building, and not try to think about how to address systemic issues, like we're gonna get really tired and we're gonna get like burnt out. And I think that was my experience of the affordable housing world, where I joined an affordable housing developer, and like I was just kind of like, when are we gonna stop building and think about how to address the structural issues, or like when are we gonna do both? And a lot of times, like at least in my experience in the affordable housing world, like there's no time to think about addressing structural issues because you are on a strict like development plan, and you have a pipeline, and you're going through all these like applications. And so for me, like I just feel like there needs to be space to be creative as we're experimenting. And not just creative in the way we build partnerships, but then around how we like build solutions. And I think for me, it's been really inspiring the last like 6 years to be in a like a region where there's like more accessibility to experiment and to think strategically around how we shift conditions long term in a region, and not just think. And yes, like we are thinking about how many units we're going to build, how much, but at the same time, like we're also thinking about what are the gaps in the infrastructure that we have. And I think like the work that Common Council is doing with COCP is like one of those consequences, right? Or one of those like things that happened because people came together and said, like, we're tired. Like, we did all the training of how to be an affordable housing developer. We are paper ready, and we're still not having any success because this type of work is disinvested. And so, how are we going to challenge investors? How are we going to challenge um, people who are coming up with products, or not people, institutions, around like how to stop using redlining in our communities because we're still not eligible for loans. And so for like that's like an example of like COCP, but then also in LA, like we were tired of competing, like seeing affordable housing developers compete over LIHTC, right? And it's really messy. It's really like competitive and it's really rigorous. And so for us, it's like, well, how do we create more funding, but funding that is actually going to build permanent affordability, funding that's actually going to create like resources for people not to get evicted. How are we going to like fund like lawyers so that like when a landlord's trying to evict someone unjustly, they're going to be protected? And so for us, like I think those are kind of the things beyond like just the partnerships, because like there's a lot of lessons in terms of partnerships that I could go into, but I think it's also like where is the space for us to think bigger? Where is the space to us experiment around thinking bigger and not just around, and also like deepening our relationships of how we work together.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Gerrlyn.
Yeah, no, I really love that, Roberto. Like, and I think just to kind of pull at a couple of threads that both of y'all have kind of mentioned, like to echo, yes, like funding, the need for funding is very, very much needed, very challenging to come by for certain things. And in addition to that, like there's definitely a need for space for experimentation, creating that like space, like you were mentioning, Roberto, to like ideate and like get creative, and then also to be able to like develop relationships. Because I feel like so much of the work in this movement is really built on relationships and support and cooperation and collaboration, right? And I feel like, yeah, like COCP, like I appreciate that the shout out, because I feel like COCP is meant to be, we've tried to design it to be a kind of space where we can do that and build something new. But obviously, it's also very hard to build something new in the shell of the old, right? Because what happens is we have this like grand vision that, for example, we put in our North Star doc, and we hit all of these challenges that kind of feel like contradictions in our work, or that really challenge us to say, do we move in this direction, yes or no, even if it's not exactly what we thought it was going to look like, right? And even just thinking about, again, I'm in philanthropy. And so just even thinking about sort of the perspective of like philanthropy and in our traditional, housing finance systems, even we like in this process, we face so much skepticism by folks in the space around like, will a financial model like COCPs even pencil out? Are we, I think you mentioned it earlier, Felix, where it's like, there's a skepticism around like, are we not going to just reproduce the same kinds of capital that are already out there and become something that already exists? Or skepticism around like, are you really going to be able to create a central fund that can support diverse sets of housing models? Because obviously in community ownership, there are so many bespoke models. So how do we like really push through that challenge? Or even, again, like something more core to the model, like will community governance for a fund like this actually work? We face a lot of skepticism from like traditional like finance actors around like, do groups on the ground actually have the expertise that it takes to operate this fund? Which, by the way, the answer is yes. But yeah, like I think that those are all things that we tend to hit, and it's really challenging to navigate. And we would think that even as a funder ourselves, being in philanthropy, that it would be I don't know if easier is the word, but like it would be yeah, maybe easier. But even I would say for us, like just like community groups or community partners, even we face a lot of challenges with trying to make sure that we can advocate for this work more. We've had a lot of success, but I feel like that work is so ongoing. And we've learned that it takes so much like significant time and capacity on a consistent basis to really maintain that, right? Because kind of like what I was mentioning earlier in terms of the origin story of COCP, we're asking for philanthropy to step up with providing resources on the grant making side, but especially on the investment side. And like just because you have a champion on the program side doesn't mean that you're going to have that same champion or that relationship on the other side of the house with investments in philanthropy. And so we've been learning a lot about like the amount of work that we have to continue to really do and dedicate to doing this with, again, like some of the limitations around funding for this type of work. And really, I feel like you really spoke to a lot of that, Roberto, around the skepticism with trying to support like this more emerging work that still needs a lot of, like, I think people just get scared because there is no one way to do it. So, it's not like we can necessarily pinpoint to a specific model that says, yes, that's the one. That's like the success model. There are like many. So, yeah.
Yes, definitely. I'm hearing from you all just a clear sense of like this work is really hard, and also feeling like there are so many promising paths forward that you all have spoken to, and how we need to be shifting our approach, our ways of being, and also sense that there is so much possibility there. And we could talk for a really long time about all of this, and want to also make time to hear some of the questions that are coming up. But before we do that, I want to give you all a chance either to respond to each other, some of the things that you've heard, or offer some final thoughts. Like what especially would you offer to your fellow practitioners situated in the part of the ecosystem that you're in, um, as some guidance or encouragement when it comes to doing this hard work. And yeah, anyone please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just say that like I think the challenges are great, right? Because there's a lot of things even now that are out of our control, like the current shift in political climate. But I'd say like it's still really important that we continue to experiment and like not just experiment, but like actually do things, like really doable things. And so like I really like Felix's example of the South Bay CLT in terms of like how an affordable housing developer and the CLT could work together. And I think that's like it's really impressive for me to see that outside of LA because it feels like LA is kind of like the place where a lot of that is happening, but like seeing that in the South Bay, especially in the South Bay, is like really key. And I think just like the work that we've been doing with like Common Counsel and the COCP, yeah, like when we entered that space, we were really like it was really visionary and really empowering. And like the way we've struggled has been also really important and like learned, like especially like when you have to make decisions of like adding, more interest rate to your capital that you want to release or something like that. But just in general, like I'm still really hopeful, and I hope like y'all walk away with that kind of motivation to just like enter a partnership or like start a campaign in your region or like reach out to any of us in terms of like how we can support and like building scale in whatever that is. But I think all of it like from partnerships to like campaigns like really kind of we all like need to be working on like something of that sort. And so like I offer myself as someone to reach out to and as like yeah as a big supporter of this experimentation.
I'll second that on the experimentation. I think I'm looking forward to seeing some of this like come to fruition. And I think the wins that we are able to achieve is going to then spur more innovation and more creativity and more people getting involved, right? Because people will see like, oh, it's possible to do this. This community is, has actually done it. And now I think that'll inspire more work. Um, for the light tech developers, I think I would I would ask for like maybe more openness to the idea of ways to do things, ways to do housing that does not involve light tech, and ways to accomplish our missions, which we all share as more housing, more affordable housing. That we can help by using our expertise in the field to help other organizations and other visionaries to try and achieve that. We were once there 50 years ago trying to figure all this out. And now we can be the help for others to try a different way to go about it. And then, if you have to get it by your boss or your board, call it technical assistance, sign an agreement, get paid for it, whatever, like whatever it takes to get you involved and share that expertise and share your gift in the real estate world with others so that they can accomplish their work.
I can follow up and just kind of say, I feel like um it's not just about, having the answer to this work because none of us really have the answer. We're all just trying to figure this out together. And that's definitely something I feel like I've learned throughout this process in facilitating the COCP program. But it's really what is really needed is more about can we have the attitude to try to figure this out together? Can we have the spirit and the desire to one, stay grounded with our values and bottom lines, but really like lean forward to grappling with the contradictions that we know again that we're gonna hit and not let perfection be the enemy of the good, right? Like kind of like what I was mentioning earlier, we're to remind folks like we're trying to do something in this work that is transformative, but within the limitations of our current systems. And so we know we're gonna hit areas along the way that doesn't feel right or good, or we're questioning ourselves. And that's not the place to say, no, we can't do it, or it's not going to work. That is the opportunity and the opening to say, how do we figure this out? And who else do we need to talk to understand like how we get through this? And I think again, like, so much of this conversation is around partnerships, and that's where partnerships come to play. Who can you organize? Who can you get together with? Who can you find that will be a partner and really being down to like ideate with you and not just say no, but think about how do we go around that, or how do we kind of try to be creative to build something that may not exist, but what can we do to make something work? So.
Yes, I so appreciate all of these answers. And all of the wisdom that you all bring to this work. I want to pass it over to Eli now to bring in some questions from the big room.
Great, everybody. Thanks everyone for your questions in the Q&A box. I've been trying to kind of group them together so we could touch all the different themes and topics you're raising. And the first one is around engaging community and shifting culture and ensuring that folks are meaningfully engaged, and the tension with the capacity and time that it takes to do that. And really just an interest in kind of how you think about the principles or strategies for that work. Anybody want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I could say like it is going to take time. Uh, I've in LA, I've been at it for 10 years. Um, when I first arrived in LA, like community land trusts were a mythical thing. And there was like two of them who were like, struggling to, not because of lack of leadership or good internal infrastructure. It was more of like just like I said, like the disinvestment around community ownership. Um, and so 10 years later, like I think there's like seven CLTs. Um, there's like a robust like social housing program that we're trying to implement throughout the city. We're building like new housing agencies and institutions, and still fighting off, the 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 like the real estate speculation and all the capital that goes behind it and all the investment that goes against like fighting everything that we fought for. So like 10 years, like in the 10 years that I've been here, like it's been campaign after campaign, trying to figure out like what is the right way to win significant amount of infrastructure, right? Through policies and funding. And so the really strong relationships that we built through those campaigns, through that like failure, was also really important. And then I think just like the way we've built community land trusts in specific neighborhoods throughout LA is like deep organizing. Like it's like the land trust that I'm part of and the people that I co-founded the land trust are senoras, are people who I've like grown up with, like that have either been here for generations or migrated here. The relationship with Little Tokyo Service Center is like pre-exist me, like in terms of all the work that's been here. So like I think wherever you're place based, like I think it's really kind of looking at those relationships that exist or that don't exist and starting to work on them. But yeah, I'd say that like the kind of current state of housing and the way we're like fighting together, or this like ecosystem that we have, has been built over years and years of like what I'm calling experimentation, and that like those uh, and so like I don't like it, if you have like examples of what kind of relationships, I could definitely bring them, but yeah, like it is like years of work that's been developed here.
Thank you, Roberto. Yeah, so it's long term, it's deep, real relationships, it's figuring out strategies that will actually win and will help defend people from the struggles, the attacks they're facing, and so much more. Gerrlyn or Felix, do you want to add anything to that?
I'll just add it's like it's not just more organizing, and I think there was a chat like this. It's just not more communication or more advocacy, right? It's how we do it as well. And I'll use an example. When I was on the board of East Bay Housing Organizations, there were conversations within a subcommittee around the height of an affordable housing building in Berkeley. And I think the disagreement was between housing advocates of different camps. And one camp might say, we want more height, we want a high rise to get more housing. And another camp might say, well, that doesn't fit in the neighborhood, and we need to kind of keep it within the range of the city planning code plus the state density bonus, and then call it at that. And what we can't have is one side essentially then saying to the other side, well, you guys aren't true housing advocates. So, and having that break between people who otherwise would be perfectly aligned, so I think how you organize and how you bring people to the table, that again has ramifications beyond just housing, right? It's, how do people civically engage each other? How do people build consensus? Those are all skills that are going to translate to other issues, whether that issues are, what other people have brought up in the chat about, getting corporations out of government, and getting money out of political campaigns, that kind of stuff. Those will all need people who are able to communicate with each other, who can bridge instead of break, and who can really kind of see that larger vision of where we are all trying to go and then head in that direction together.
Yes, thank you, Felix. So it depends on what the fight is, and it reminds me of the organizers saying if you lose, then maybe you need to pick a bigger fight. And sometimes we get caught up in these divisions that are really about the small fights. There's another couple questions here about wealth building and kind of how you think about community-owned housing and its relationship to the wealth gaps and the racial inequities in wealth. Yeah, who would like to speak to that?
I can start by saying that LIHTC housing does only a very, very little bit of helping people build wealth, right? The only wealth you can build is whatever you can save that didn't go to market rate rents. But there's nothing more than that. And so, it's it's better than if you have to spend all your money on market rate rent, but it doesn't lead you to solve the wealth gap issue, right? So we need to have other models and other choices.
Can you repeat the question again, Eli? Sorry.
Yeah, the question's about the kind of limitations of limited equity ownership in terms of building wealth for the residents, the residents' opportunity to build wealth, and the concern that it doesn't address the wealth gap and the major inequities in wealth.
Did you want to add, Roberto, and I could follow up, or did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I could go like this is something that in the relationships that we have here and why we formed a community land trust. I think we're trying to move away from this conversation of individual wealth building for families. I know it's important. I know it's like specifically because it's really tied to home ownership and like U.S. pathology. uh, but and like the people that I work with and I'm in a relationship with are like immigrant families. A lot of them are not even first generation. They've arrived like 30, 40 years ago. Um, and like they don't have access to home ownership, and especially like any other like wealth building investments. And so a lot of times home ownership programs come and exist in our community and like are consistently like building people up to buy a home. But then when they finished all the trainings, when they saved up money, they can't afford it. And they have like no other ways of investment. A lot of folks like don't even have like a retirement investment. in terms of like through their labor or through their work. And so for us, like I think it's when we think of wealth building, we think about like community wealth building in terms of like what are the investments we could bring to our neighborhood that are going to benefit like a large portion of the community. And for us, like permanent affordability for people is a way of having them have more income and being able to then save it or do something with it that benefits their family and benefits other people around them. And so, like in a lot of ways, like it's a really strong principle that we have around the way we're trying to think about economy in our community land trust. And so, for us, like, how do we not keep wealth uh, in the hands of like individual families, but how do we keep wealth at a neighborhood level in terms of like the resources we bring, the housing, the type of housing people have, and the potential of it for also creating jobs or like some sort of independence from maybe the exploitive like working sector. And so also like the way we want to change capital is another kind of way that we're experimenting around how communities have access to capital at a lower interest rate and it has like decision making over how the capital is used as well. And so maybe I'll leave it there for Gerrlyn to talk about it.
No, plus, plus, plus. I won't even try to I just echo everything that you said. I think the only thing that I would like add is that like if our current systems worked and if everybody was able to afford a house and build wealth, then we wouldn't be here talking about this panel today, right? This is about an opportunity to like create new pathways for folks that can't currently access housing to be able to do that and find stable shelter over the long run, where multiple generations can really benefit off of that, not just theirs, right? And so, like, on one hand, yes, of course, like, I'm not gonna, for even BIPOC communities, like, folk families have been able to generate wealth in their families off of housing. And, like, I think that kind of like to what you were saying, Roberto, like, it is hard to really divorce that and, like, kind of separate that in terms of, like, from the world that we know we want to build that doesn't include, the commodification of housing in like a capitalist system. But this is really about as well, yeah, like creating pathways for ownership and stewarding land and housing together for folks in a way that they can't currently access for BIPOC low income folks. And so it's just like, how are we? I think I saw someone put in the chat like options, options, and I think you kind of mentioned that too, Felix. But it's like, how are we widening the pie to give more people the option to find stable housing, not just for themselves, but for their future generations?
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'll share is that like we just can't also not talk about like the wealth gap isn't because people aren't working hard enough. It's that there's like real forces that are like keeping people from actually and communities and from actually building wealth. Like until we like change like a lot of systemic things, like so like part of the solutions we come up with are kind of like need to be addressing that. Like we can't avoid not talking about like that there are real forces in the way our like society is structured that are keeping people from building wealth or like and not just like families but like a whole like portion like a huge the majority of the population that lives in this country right now and the world.
Thank you for that. All right, last question. There were a couple people who were interested in where you go for tools, templates, and just kind of the practical resources for things like how light tech could help with a particular project or bylaws or other things like that. If all three of you could just share some of your top sources for practical resources like that.
For LIHTC in the Bay Area, there's the nonprofit housing ooh, impeach, nonprofit housing of Northern California NPH, and then Housing California. So both of those are big resources. And then I think there's Common Ground. That's a CLT resource, but defer to Roberto and others.
Yeah, if you're in California, big shout outs to the California CLT network. I'm a board member. And yeah, like I think the network is really trying to figure out how to disperse capacity building throughout the state. And so I definitely reach out. I also welcome you to our annual conference that's happening in September 25th to 26th in Fresno. And then yeah, I'd say like in terms of like community land trust, but also like there's a lot of really great coalitions. If you're thinking about campaigns as well, or thinking about strategy, there's like Homes for All California, the Right to City folks are also really great. And then there's like different regional infrastructures that are set up. So like LA has the LA CLT coalition, that has been also really helpful in Southern California. And I think like so like thinking about Southern California if you're in the region. But yeah, I think those are the folks that I've kind of come to mind right now. Um, but we could also kind of think of others and maybe send them out or something.
Yeah, there's also a couple of more national groups that come to mind too, like you have. They do a lot of like co-op focused work across the country, and then Grounded Solutions Network, if folks aren't already familiar or connected with them either, I can put the link in the chat for them too. They offer resources as well.
Oh yeah, the Center for Cooperative Development in Davis is really, they also have an annual conference, and they're really good. And yeah, and you have as well. And then LA is in the process of developing the LA Housing Training Hub, which I'll be the director of, and that's why I'm transitioning out of my co-director role, but that's still in the process of getting developed.
Amazing. That's a wealth of knowledge and resources. We are tying up the last minute here. And yeah, it struck me that, a few times we were talking about the 2008, 2009 meltdown of the housing system and the way that so many of us who experienced that saw how devastating this housing system is. And really that was some of the origin story of our hunger for systemic solutions. And then we started imagining these solutions and developing these community visions for what an alternative could be, and experimenting and then starting to exchange knowledge. And now there's just this flourishing of all these different experiments, and in these networks where we can exchange knowledge on, well, this worked this way and this partnership helped us with this, or we developed this resource that we can share with you that way. And that this is all reliant on actual relationships that take time and trust to build. And some of that shared history helps, but also our shared values and our shared vision of the future, that we're trusting that, like, while we may not agree on every step of the way, or we may not use the same language to describe the same conditions, we're on pathways towards a shared future, and that allows us to continue to collaborate, continue to stay in relationship, continue to have enough trust to share vulnerabilities, to share new ideas for experimentation, and share what we're learning along the way. So this has just been so rich. I think it's really given us such so many insights into like what it actually takes to build that ecosystem that we all want to build, that would allow for that future of scaling up and scaling out and scaling deeper, community-owned housing. So thank you all, Felix, Gerrlyn, Roberto, Nicole, Miley, Mylana, and everybody who's come today. thank you all so much. We'll be in touch with an email with all the resources and the recording, and feel free to reach out. Let's keep in touch.